The trading floor was a battlefield, and Christopher Wolfe was its most feared general. At 28, he'd clawed his way to the top of Wall Street. His name whispered in awe and dread, the Wolf. They called him for his unrelenting drive and razor-sharp instincts. But tonight, as he stood alone in his penthouse, the city's skyline a cold constellation beyond his floor-to-ceiling windows, something inside him cracked. He wasn't supposed to feel this way. Not after another million-dollar deal closed. Not after the champagne, toasts, and backslaps from men who envied and despised him in equal measure. Yet, the hollow ache in his chest grew heavier, a weight no amount of success could lift. Christopher poured himself a whiskey, the amber liquid catching the dim light of his sleek, modern apartment. He didn't drink to celebrate tonight. He drank to forget the question that haunted him. What's it all for? His phone buzzed. A sharp intrusion. A text from an unknown number. Meet me at the Rusty Anchor. 10 p.m. You owe me one. Wolf. No name. No explanation. Christopher's jaw tightened. He didn't owe anyone anything. Not anymore. But curiosity, that old, reckless spark, tugged at him. The Rusty Anchor was a dive bar in Brooklyn, a world away from his polished Manhattan life. He glanced at his watch, 9:15. Against his better judgment, he grabbed his coat. The bar was a haze of neon and cigarette smoke, its jukebox blaring a Springsteen song that felt like a punch to the gut. Christopher, in his tailored navy suit, stood out like a diamond in a coal mine. Heads turned, but he ignored them, scanning the room until his eyes landed on a figure at the bar. Lean, blonde, with a leather jacket that hugged his shoulders just right, the man looked up, and their gazes locked. Blue eyes, sharp and knowing, cut through the haze like a blade. "You're late," the man said, his voice low, teasing, but with an edge that made Christopher's pulse quicken. "I don't even know who you are," Christopher shot back, sliding onto the stool beside him. The man smirked, sliding a beer across the counter. "Ethan Caldwell. We met once, 3 years ago, at that charity gala you crashed to schmooze some hedge fund guy. You owe me for the tip I gave you on that startup. Made you a fortune, didn't it?" Christopher's mind raced, piecing together the memory. Ethan Caldwell, the journalist with a knack for digging up secrets no one else could. That tip had been a gold mine, but Christopher hadn't thought of him since. "What do you want?" Caldwell. Ethan leaned closer, his breath warm against Christopher's ear. "I need your help. And you need mine, even if you don't know it yet." The words hung between them, heavy with promise and danger. Ethan's story spilled out over the next hour, each detail more unsettling than the last. He was investigating a corporate conspiracy, a shadow network of traders and executives manipulating markets, laundering billions through shell companies. The kind of scandal that could topple empires, including Christopher's. Ethan had evidence, but he needed an insider to navigate the labyrinth of Wall Street's elite. Christopher was his ticket. "You're insane," Christopher said, draining his whiskey. "You think I'm going to risk everything for some half-baked expose?" Ethan's eyes darkened. "You're not risking everything. You're saving yourself. You know what happens to wolves when the pack turns on them." Christopher wanted to laugh it off, to walk away and forget this reckless, infuriating man. But something in Ethan's gaze, fierce, unyielding, and oddly vulnerable, held him in place. It was the first time in years anyone had looked at him like he was more than a machine, more than the wolf. "Fine," Christopher said, his voice low. "But if I'm in, you play by my rules." Ethan's smile was slow. "Dangerous." "Deal." The next week was a blur of clandestine meetings and late-night strategy sessions. Ethan's apartment in Williamsburg became their war room, its walls plastered with documents, charts, and grainy photos of men in suits who held the keys to the conspiracy. Christopher brought his expertise, decoding financial records with a precision that left Ethan in awe. But it wasn't just the work that kept him coming back. It was Ethan himself, the way his laugh broke through the tension, the way his hand brushed Christopher's when passing a coffee cup, the way he challenged every wall Christopher had built around himself. One night, as rain lashed the windows, Ethan pushed a laptop aside and looked at Christopher, his expression softer than usual. "Why do you do it?" he asked. "The whole Wall Street thing. You're not like them, Chris. You're better than that." Christopher stiffened. No one called him Chris. No one dared. "You don't know me," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "I know enough," Ethan replied, stepping closer. "I know you're lonely as hell, even with all that money. I know you're scared to let anyone in. And I know you feel this, too." The air between them crackled. Christopher's heart pounded, a traitor to his carefully controlled life. He wanted to deny it, to retreat to the safety of his penthouse and his empire. But Ethan's hand found his, warm and steady, and, for the first time in years, Christopher didn't pull away. The rooftop was their sanctuary, a stolen moment above the city's chaos. Christopher leaned into Ethan's touch, their foreheads pressed together, the world fading to a distant hum. For once, the wolf felt human, fragile, and impossibly alive. But the investigation was closing in, and danger followed like a shadow. Ethan's sources were going dark, their messages cryptic or non-existent. One night, a burner phone arrived at Ethan's apartment with a single text: "Stop digging, or you're both dead." Christopher's blood ran cold, but Ethan only laughed, tossing the phone onto the couch. "They're scared," he said. "That means we're close. Close, but not close enough." The conspiracy's tentacles reached higher than either had imagined, implicating senators, CEOs, even the SEC. Christopher's name was on too many of those documents, his deals tangled in the web. If they exposed the truth, his career, his entire life, could collapse. Yet, every time he thought of walking away, Ethan's voice echoed in his mind, "You're better than that." Their partnership deepened, but so did their feelings. Late nights turned into early mornings. Confessions whispered over coffee cups. Ethan told Christopher about his childhood in a small Ohio town, where being openly gay meant being an outcast. Christopher shared fragments of his own past, a cold, ambitious father who saw emotions as weakness, a mother who left when he was 10. They were two broken pieces, fitting together in ways neither expected. One evening, in a rare moment of quiet, Ethan pulled Christopher onto the couch, their legs tangled together. "What happens when this is over?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Will you go back to being the wolf?" Christopher's throat tightened. He wanted to promise Ethan everything: a future, a life beyond the deals and deadlines. But the truth was, he didn't know if he could. "I don't know who I am without it," he admitted. Ethan's fingers traced the line of Christopher's jaw. Then let me help you find out. The breakthrough came at a cost. Ethan's contact, a whistleblower named Maria, slipped them a USB drive with encrypted files, proof of the conspiracy's inner workings. But hours later, Maria vanished. Her apartment was trashed, her phone disconnected. Ethan's bravado faltered, and for the first time, Christopher saw fear in his eyes. "We can't stop now," Ethan said, pacing the apartment. "Maria trusted us. We owe her." Christopher grabbed his arm, pulling him close. "We'll get them," he promised. "But we do this smart. No more risks." Ethan nodded, but the tension between them lingered. They were in too deep, and the stakes were no longer just professional. Christopher felt it every time Ethan smiled, every time their hands brushed. This wasn't just about the truth anymore. It was about protecting the one person who made him feel alive. The city never slept, but Christopher and Ethan barely did either. Days blurred into nights as they decrypted Maria's files, each revelation more damning than the last. Names, dates, transactions, a roadmap to corruption that could shake Wall Street to its core. But the closer they got, the more dangerous it became. Christopher's firm started asking questions, subtle at first, then pointed. His mentor, Richard Hayes, a silver-haired titan with a smile like a shark, called him into his office one morning. "You've been distracted?" "Wolf," Richard said, leaning back in his leather chair. "Anything I should know about?" Christopher's pulse spiked, but he kept his face neutral. "Just closing deals, sir." "Like always." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Keep it that way. We don't need any complications." The warning was clear, and it chilled Christopher to the bone. He was being watched. That night, he told Ethan everything, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and defiance. Ethan listened, his expression unreadable, then pulled Christopher into a fierce embrace. "We're in this together," he said. "No matter what, together." They devised a plan. Ethan would leak the story to a trusted editor at the New York Times, while Christopher would use his access to gather the final piece of evidence, a ledger hidden in his firm's servers. It was a gamble, one that could cost them everything. But as they stood on Ethan's balcony, the city sprawling beneath them, Christopher felt a clarity he'd never known. For the first time, he wasn't fighting for power or money. He was fighting for Ethan, for truth, for a chance at something real. The hack was meticulous, every keystroke a heartbeat. Christopher sat in his office after hours, the glow of his monitor the only light in the room. Ethan was on the phone, guiding him through the back doors of the firm's system. "You're almost there," Ethan whispered. "Just don't get caught." Christopher's fingers flew across the keyboard, his mind sharp despite the exhaustion. He found a ledger, hundreds of pages detailing illegal trades, bribes, and cover-ups. He downloaded it, his heart racing as the progress bar crept forward. Then, an alert flashed on the screen, unauthorized access detected. "Shit," Christopher muttered, yanking the USB drive free. He was out of his office in seconds, the building's silence amplifying his footsteps. He didn't stop until he reached Ethan's apartment, where Ethan was waiting, his face pale. "Did you get it?" Ethan asked. Christopher held up the drive, his breath ragged. "We've got them," but the victory was short-lived. The next morning, Christopher's phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. "You're next." Attached was a photo of him and Ethan on the rooftop, their moment of intimacy captured in grainy detail. Panic clawed at Christopher's chest, but Ethan's calm grounded him. "They're trying to scare us," Ethan said, his voice steady. "We're too close to back down now." They moved fast, encrypting the ledger and sending it to Ethan's editor. But the threats escalated. Christopher's apartment was ransacked, his car followed by unmarked SUVs. Ethan's sources reported whispers of a hit ordered by someone high up in the conspiracy. The walls were closing in, and Christopher felt the weight of every decision he'd made. One night, as they hid out in a safe house in Queens, Ethan broke the silence. "If we don't make it through this," he said, his voice raw, "I need you to know something. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." Christopher's heart stopped. He'd spent years building walls, but Ethan had torn them down with every glance, every touch. "I'm not losing you," Christopher said, pulling Ethan close. Their kiss was desperate, a promise against the chaos threatening to tear them apart. The next day, they met Ethan's editor, Sarah, in a crowded cafe. She took the drive, her face grim. "This is explosive," she said. "But you two need to disappear until it's published. They'll come for you." Disappearing wasn't easy for a man like Christopher, whose life was plastered across financial news. But for Ethan, he'd do anything. They fled to a cabin in upstate New York, a place Ethan's family owned, hidden among pines and silence. For the first time in weeks, they could breathe. They spent days talking, laughing, making love by the fireplace. It was a fragile peace, but it was theirs. One evening, as snow dusted the ground outside, Christopher found Ethan staring at the fire, his expression distant. "What's wrong?" Christopher asked, sitting beside him. "I'm scared," Ethan admitted. "Not of them. What happens after? Will you still want us, when the dust settles?" Christopher took his hand, his voice firm. "I've spent my life chasing things that don't matter. You're the only thing that does." The story broke on a Tuesday morning. Headlines screamed across every major outlet. Wall Street scandal exposed, billions laundered, elites implicated, the ledger named names, and the fallout was swift. Arrests followed, markets trembled, and Christopher's firm collapsed overnight. His name was in the papers, not as the wolf, but as a whistleblower who risked everything. But the danger wasn't over. A black SUV trailed them as they left the cabin, forcing them to abandon their car and flee on foot through the snowy woods. Ethan's hand gripped Christopher's, their breaths visible in the freezing air. "We're almost there," Ethan panted, leading them to a rendezvous point where Sarah had promised a car. Gunshots rang out, splintering the silence. Christopher shoved Ethan behind a tree, his body shielding him. "Stay down," he hissed, his heart pounding. The attackers were close, their voices sharp in the cold. Christopher's mind raced. He'd never been a fighter, but he'd be damned if he let them touch Ethan. They ran, branches snapping underfoot, until they reached the road. Sarah's car screeched to a halt, and they dove inside, tires spinning as they sped away. Ethan's hand found Christopher's, their fingers interlocking. "We made it," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling with relief. Back in the city, the world had changed. The conspiracy's leaders were in custody, and the public hailed Ethan and Christopher as heroes. But the cost was steep. Christopher's career was over, his fortune frozen in legal battles. He didn't care. Standing in Ethan's apartment, watching the sunrise paint the skyline gold, he felt free for the first time. "I don't know what's next," Christopher said, turning to Ethan. "But I know I want it with you." Ethan smiled, pulling him close. "Then we'll figure it out." Together, months later, they stood on a different rooftop, this one in a small coastal town far from New York's chaos. The ocean stretched before them, endless and calm. Christopher had traded his suits for jeans, his penthouse for a modest house they shared. Ethan was writing again, freelancing for local papers, his passion undimmed by the ordeal. They weren't rich, not anymore, but they were happy. Christopher had found something better than power, a love that made him feel whole. The wolf was gone, replaced by a man who'd learned to fight for what mattered. One evening, as they watched the sunset, Ethan slipped a ring onto Christopher's finger. It wasn't flashy, just a simple band of silver, but it carried a promise. "I told you I'd help you find yourself," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "Will you let me keep doing it? For the rest of our lives?" Christopher's eyes burned with tears, but he smiled. "Only if you let me do the same." They kissed as the waves crashed below, two men who'd faced a storm and found their way home. The world would keep turning, with its scandals and struggles. But here, in this moment, they had everything they needed: love, truth, and each other, a victory worth more than any fortune.